if you take a cruise in a balcony cabin, you can look forward to views of the ocean and the ports that you'll be visiting. That is not what happened on my last cruise though, because I stayed in what is called a neighbourhood balcony, which although it did have a balcony, it had no clear view of the ocean. It is one of the most controversial cabins at sea and definitely one of the strangest cabins I've ever had. I saw and heard some weird things from here too. There are plenty of videos and reviews online that warn other people not to stay in this cabin, but as I didn't want to pay the price of an ocean view facing balcony and this one was much cheaper, I decided to give it a go. I usually cruise in inside cabins anyway that don't have any windows, so I figured this must be a step up from that. The ship that I was sailing on was Symphony of the Seas, which is one of the biggest and most exciting cruise ships in the world. I was so happy and so excited to have a cruise booked on this ship that I probably would have stayed in a cupboard or a lifeboat if that was the only way that I could have got on this cruise. Still, I hope that I wouldn't regret my decision to book this cabin. I'd been looking forward to this cruise for years. I booked what is called a guaranteed cabin, which meant that I was guaranteed to at least get what I booked, but I hadn't picked my specific cabin location. Doing this saved me a little bit of money, and usually what happens with guaranteed cabins is that you do get assigned the leftover cabins. That is probably what happened here. Everybody who was willing to pay to pick their room did, and then the guaranteed cabins were assigned. Still, I was very happy with the cabin that I was given. I was assigned cabin 11707 on deck 11, which I would later found out overlooked an area called the Boardwalk. On Royal Caribbean's website, the neighbourhood balconies look amazing, and it looks as though they either overlook a peaceful kind of park area or a space with a couple of restaurants and bars. I did worry that we wouldn't have any privacy, but I was so excited to be right in the middle of the action. Looking at the deck plans, I noticed that we were towards the back of the ship, and this meant that we were overlooking the boardwalk instead of the park. I knew that this area was often used for late night parties and for aqua theatre shows, but I hoped that it wouldn't be a problem. I can sleep through most things, or so I thought. When we embarked the ship, we walked into this huge central street on deck 5 and went up the stairs to deck 11 to find our room. Having a cabin on deck 11 did turn out to be great because it was halfway between the inside areas on deck 6, 7 and 8 and places like the buffet and the pools that were on 15, 16 and 17. I didn't take the lift once during this cruise, so I spent a lot of time wandering up and down these stairs. I was very impressed with the quality of the maps and the signage around the ship, which for somebody like me who could get lost inside a paper bag is very important. The closest staircase to my cabin had this giant painting of Mario, which made it very easy to find. I would just walk up or down the stairs until I found Mario, and as long as I was at the right staircase, I was fine. My first impressions of the cabin were very good. It felt spacious, and I loved this big sofa area to the side. I'd cruised in the past on another Royal Caribbean ship called Symphony of the Seas, and the design definitely reminded me a lot of that cabin. On Anthem though, I did have a clear view of the ocean, which was very important because we were cruising to Norway, and Norway is beautiful. Symphony of the Seas launched in 2017, which by cruise ship standards makes her pretty new. The sofa to the side here does become a bed if you do have a third person staying in the cabin, but we didn't, so this stayed in sofa mode for the entire cruise. The cabin also had a big double bed, a TV and a desk opposite the sofa. I did worry that it might be a bit windy being in the middle of the ship, and I wasn't sure that the sun would actually come onto our balcony very often. I'm from the UK, and the hottest the temperature ever gets here is around 30 C, which is around 86 Fahrenheit. We had temperatures hotter than that every single day of this cruise, and a humidity that I do not think humans should exist in. It was such a relief to put down my bag that I've been carrying since 5 AM. I travelled from London to board the ship in Barcelona, and rather unsurprisingly, the first room that I needed to visit was the bathroom. I put my phone on charge using one of the plug sockets here on the desk, and I went to have a look around. The bathroom was fairly small, but the shower area was large and there was space for everything that we needed. I liked the design, and later in the cruise I would find out that there was a nightlight in here, which is always appreciated by me. The biggest complaint that I'd heard about this cabin pre-cruise was that there was a lack of privacy on the balcony because of the cabins that are opposite. Walking back into the room from the bathroom, and this was immediately obvious. I realised that anybody in their cabins or on their balconies opposite could see into the room, and I could see into their rooms too. I was amazed by just how messy some people leave their cabins, but live and let live, I say, unless they're expecting the cabin stewards to tidy up after them, in which case no, that is not cool. It reminded me of how river cruise ships will often dock side by side. When that happens though, you are only a few centimeters from the opposite cabin, and that is really weird when you're not expecting it. I went outside to have a look around and I was excited to be able to look down into the street that was on deck 8. This is the first time I'd seen this area, and the huge slides and the glass windows of the lounges and the restaurants was very impressive. I did see this in there later, which with no context is pretty scary. It turns out that this is a restaurant called Wonderland, and it is an Alice in Wonderland themed restaurant. I suppose in that context the Mad Hatter Man does make sense, but when I first saw it, it was really weird. I hope that I would be able to get used to not using my balcony as a private space. I wasn't planning on doing anything that I didn't want other people to see, but it would be so easy to come out of the shower in a towel and just forget, or to kind of lay on the bed in the evening. Usually when you cruise, the only thing opposite your balcony is the sea, so it isn't really something you have to think about. I do like to sit out on my balcony and watch sailways, and the fact that the sea is so far from my cabin was very different from anything I've ever experienced before. At this point it was pretty quiet out, but that would change soon. It wasn't long after this that our luggage arrived and we unpacked. There was loads of storage in this cabin, and there were tons of drawers by the bed and over by the mirror. There were 2 areas for hanging space, and we didn't end up using half the storage space that we had. It would be a little bit different if there were more than 2 of you in the room, and perhaps we were cruising somewhere colder, but for us all that we had were really light summer clothes that didn't take up much space. I put my suitcase in the bottom here, and I would put my dirty clothes in there at the end of the day, and also normally midway through the day, because it was so hot that every time we went outside you had to have a shower and change your clothes. This did mean that my bag basically packed itself throughout the cruise though. We were actually in the cabin for sail away, but we missed it completely because there was just no way to tell that we were moving. The ship didn't feel like it had moved at all, and we never felt any movement in this cabin, which was great. We did have fantastic weather, so that may have had something to do with it, but we never felt any vibrations or any juddering. We did experience one negative of being located behind the funnel, but more about that later. It wasn't long before I noticed the first person zip lining past my cabin. That is such a bizarre sentence to say, but it is 100% true. There was endless entertainment that we could watch from the balcony, and I was looking forward to seeing one of the aqua shows. The area at the back is an aqua theatre where they do shows that include diving and dancing, and I'd seen a few little preview clips online before the cruise, which just looked so cool. The first night of our cruise, we watched Hairspray in the theatre and we had an early night. I don't remember there being much noise outside the cabin, but to be honest, I was exhausted and I fell right asleep. This cabin definitely did get noisier as the cruise went on though, and I wouldn't recommend it if you have children or you're somebody who needs silence to sleep. The bed was incredibly comfortable, and I was lucky to have a plug socket by my side as there wasn't one on the other side. Because I'm from the UK, I use an adapter, and the adapter was dangerously close to the light switch that controlled the main lights for the room. Being able to get into bed and to turn off the lights was fantastic, but I was always nervous that one wrong move and I'd turn on the lights in the middle of the night. Luckily I didn't though. Over by the desk there were more sockets and USBs. There was a little bit of storage space down by the bed too, and the TV had access to all the things that I like to look at, like the daily schedule and my onboard account. I usually don't watch much TV when I cruise, but it was nice to have the option. I did find an interesting show on about the history of Royal Caribbean. The oldest Royal Caribbean cruise ship that I've been on is called Song of America, who's currently sailing as the Celestial Olympia. She was built in the 1980s, and the difference between that ship and Symphony is just bonkers. A little later in the cruise we went to the silent disco that was happening down in the boardwalk. It started around 10:45 and we left a little bit after 11. It was called a silent disco because everybody has these headphones on where you listen to music, but it definitely was not silent. From our cabin, all that we could hear were hundreds of people singing Justin Bieber, or they were dancing to Gangnam Style. It was weird, but I enjoyed it. I loved sitting on my balcony and watching everybody dance. It was funny and I felt as though I was still involved in the party, but from my balcony, which was nice. If you were trying to go to sleep though and you couldn't sleep with noise, I don't imagine that this would be as entertaining. The door did block out most of the sound, but I could still make out every single word from inside the cabin, and it went on until about 11:45. This only happened one night of our cruise though, and the majority of the noise that we heard wasn't from singing, but it was from music and the carousel. The carousel was only open during certain times of the day, and it was free to use, as were the slides and the rock climbing walls and the zip line. The carousel, or I think I would call it a merry-go-round, goes anti-clockwise, and that is your Britishism of the week. Here in the UK we say clockwise and anti-clockwise. I know in some other countries you say counterclockwise, but that really isn't a thing that's used here. It was really hot during our cruise, and having a balcony that was most of the time out of direct sunlight was fantastic. We probably wouldn't have been able to use the balcony as much as we did if we'd had a traditional balcony with the sun on it, just because of the intense heat. Another benefit of a cabin facing inwards is that everybody just put their clothes and their swimwear out there to dry. You're usually not allowed to do that on regular balconies because it might blow into the sea, but we didn't have that worry. Worst case scenario, they'd blow down and onto somebody below, but there really wasn't any wind in the middle area, so that never happened. Because it was so hot during our cruise, there were a few days when we stayed on the ship. I was working while I was on this cruise, so I'd bought the internet package, and me and my laptop spent a lot of time sitting on this balcony. One thing that I hadn't thought about pre-cruise was that there would be music from the Aqua Theatre during the day. Of course, the performers need to practice. If I practiced for 5 years, I don't know that I would be able to do one of the songs that they did, but I didn't realise that that would mean that I would hear the same song about 12 times. I'm saying 12, I counted 8, but I only started counting once I'd heard it a few times. At first, it made me very excited to go and see the Aqua shows, but by day 4 or 5, I could hear these songs in my sleep. It was really hard to get the songs out of my head, and then when I finally did, I would hear the song again and it would be back in there. The songs were pretty good, so it didn't bother me, but I think it is something that's worth remembering. The first Aqua show that we watched was called Hero, and it was absolutely phenomenal. I've never seen anything like this on a cruise before, or anywhere to be honest, and it blew my mind. The fact that this is included in the cruise fare, as are the theatre shows and the ice skating shows, it's just amazing, and for me this was one of my favourite parts of the cruise. We saw another show called Aquanation on the sea day, which was equally as good. The trust that these divers have in these little red pants is just incredible, but I'm sure they know what they're doing. The divers, not the pants. Another Britishism for you there with pants. If I could choose again, I probably would pick a neighbourhood balcony that looked over Central Park instead of the boardwalk. Central Park was normally quiet, and they even played bird songs in here. At least I assume they did, because I never saw any real birds. You may be thinking to yourself, of course Emma, real animals don't live on cruise ships. Well, I would like to introduce you to Mr. Lizard, who I found living on board Celebrity Edge. Sometimes animals do hitch a ride on cruise ships. In Central Park was a cafe where I'd often get a sandwich or a cookie and a drink. There were loads of comfortable seats out here, and I'm sure there would be less to watch if you had a cabin in here, but I think the quiet would suit me better. They do sometimes have live music like jazz in here, but even still it's mostly a relaxing place. We also wouldn't have had the problems that we had with soot if we were in a Central Park balcony cabin because it's in front of the funnel. Most days we would come back to our cabin and find some soot on the railings or the floor. It didn't bother me particularly, but I did have to clean my feet a few times. I know that that would really bother some people, so I think it's worth a mention. A lot of the bad reviews online about this cabin are about the soot, which I think is understandable. I'm not really sure what they could do to fix that at this point though. The inside of the Central Park cabins are identical to the boardwalk cabins, as are most of the cabins that you'll find on the ship. If you were to look at one balcony cabin and then look at another, you would find that they are exactly the same. I did actually manage to have a quick look inside a couple of the balcony cabins and one of the inside cabins, as a lot of the guests of this cruise disembarked partway through, so they were all vacant. Usually you don't get to look in the other cabins other than sort of peering in as you walk down the corridor, so that was cool. The only real difference in these cabins is the position of the bed. Some of the cabins will have the bed closer to the window and some will have the sofa closer to the window. This is just because of the way that cruise ship cabins are made. They are made fully formed and then loaded into the side of the cruise ship. It is incredible, and it means that there are at least 2,759 versions of this mirror on the ship. There are 2,759 pairs of curtains, and probably there's only one Captain Hudson in the fridge. It would be a bit weird if there was more. Given the price that I paid of £1,375, which is around $1,700 for the week, including all of my flights and transfers and gratuities, I was very happy with my choice of cabin. Picking an inside cabin would have only saved me around £250, which is about $320, and for me the upgrade was well worth it, especially considering how hot it was during this cruise. If I had unlimited money, I would book a traditional balcony cabin, but this one was so much fun and it felt like a good compromise between an inside and a regular balcony. This was kind of in the middle. I had another balcony cabin recently that also didn't have clear views of the ocean. Instead of looking at other cabins though, it looked straight onto the promenade deck. The promenade deck where everybody else walked and people sunbathed, that was at the end of my balcony. To find out how I found it and who I would and wouldn't recommend this cabin to, check out this video in my Weird Cruise Ship Cabin series next.